Moving to Vancouver can truly be a life-changing event, but you want it to be life-changing for all the right reasons, not the wrong reasons, am I right? This is a massive undertaking and a massive transition that you are making in your life, but it can all go sideways if you're not fully prepared. It can cost you so much time, so much money, and so much aggravation if you're not absolutely fully prepared. But don't worry, that's why I made this video. In this video, I'm going to explain exactly how I would move to Vancouver if I was making the move in 2025. Let's get into it right now. My name is Sebastian Albrecht with the Living in Vancouver, BC team, and welcome back to the channel. You guys are the people that I'm making these videos for, so thank you so much for being here and being part of this community. Whether you are commenting on these videos, watching these videos, or actually reaching out and asking me to help you move to Vancouver, I really do appreciate every single one of you. But for those of you who have just found this channel, welcome. And this channel is all about moving to and living in Vancouver. I put out videos just like this one every single week. This week, what we're talking about is if I was moving to Vancouver, how would I do it in 2025? And what kind of advice would I be giving you? What is the advice that I'm giving to my clients? Because I am a real estate agent. I am turning 50 this year. I can't quite bring myself to say it, but here I am publicly admitting it. And I've lived in Vancouver for a very long time. I've seen a lot of people come and go. And on top of that, I'm also a real estate agent. For almost 20 years, I've been helping hundreds and hundreds of families move and settle in Vancouver. So I've seen it all. And I advise people every single day on how to do this the right way and avoid the massive headaches and the massive mistakes that so many people do make. So in 2025, we're sort of in this position where things are always changing and always unique. Vancouver is a very dynamic city, and real estate in Vancouver is incredibly dynamic as well. So these are all really valid, pertinent, really critical things that you're going to want to pay attention to all the way through to the very end of this video. But first of all, I want to say the most important thing, the most important piece of advice that I could possibly give anyone is come to Vancouver with a plan. So yeah, a plan is absolutely critical to successfully moving to Metro Vancouver. You can't just arrive here and assume everything is going to go fine. As we all know, Vancouver is a complicated, expensive place to live. So there's three things I want you to be thinking about when you're coming up with this plan. One is income or jobs. Another is housing, accommodation. And the third is budgeting. And those three things are things that you need to plan out and research heavily before you actually arrive here. So let's start with jobs. And number one, ideally, you find a job before you arrive in Vancouver. If you come here without work, you're going to be behind the game. It is very challenging to find it once you're here. It's much easier sort of to be at home wherever you are currently, sort of in the comforts of your home, searching for a job rather than coming here and scrambling and being desperate to take just about anything. So keep that in mind. You want to do this ideally ahead of time. And you don't want to do it primarily through job boards. You're going to be looking at places like Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, online job boards, and things that are specific to your industry as well. If you're in IT, well, there's IT specific job boards. If you are in healthcare, there are healthcare specific job boards and businesses to reach out to. And don't be shy. Be sure to go out and check the companies that you want to work for, go onto their websites, reach out to them. There is nothing better than actually physically networking. And if you are not here and you're doing this remotely, I mean, that can be done by picking up the phone or sending an email. Doing a bit of research, doing some legwork and going above and beyond is really going to give you a leg up on everything. And then the other main area that I would focus on is LinkedIn and connecting with people that already work in your industry here in Metro Vancouver or people that are in positions to hire. And so starting to reach out as the wheels are getting in motion, I think all of that is incredibly important when you're thinking about jobs. Now, I do think it's really important when you're considering jobs here to realize incomes in Vancouver are not particularly high. We are sort of in the middle of Canadian incomes, and I think the average income is somewhere around 70,000 Canadian, which is not a lot of money, especially considering how expensive the city of Vancouver is. One of the most expensive cities in Vancouver and potentially one of the most expensive, sorry, not in Vancouver. It's one of the most, that is true too, but one of the most expensive cities in Canada as well as the world. And generally, corporations, businesses that are hiring don't feel like they have to compensate you, give you a bonus to be moving moving to a high cost of living area, because they generally know that the city of Vancouver, Metro Vancouver, sells itself. And the people who want to come here will come here almost no matter how much they're being paid. So they don't have to give you danger pay or to compensate you, or they realize they don't need to do that because they've been doing this for about 50 years and it's worked out really well for them. There's so many people that want to come here, whether or not they're being paid the most. And I'm going to put that right back with that back up on the wall. So the other thing to note about jobs in Vancouver is that we don't have a large pool of jobs that are good income for low skill. And so you're going to find, Alberta is better for that, or manufacturing in Ontario. I mean, these are industries that are at risk right now because of what's going on politically south of the border of us with tariffs. Vancouver has a lot of high paying, highly skilled jobs. And that's part of the reason that you see this income level lower than I think it would be otherwise, because we don't have that lift from sort of like for a great many people to be making a higher than typical income in low skilled sort of high wage jobs like you might find in the oil sands, or you might find in manufacturing, working in an auto plant or something like that. So these are things that are really important when you're thinking about moving to Vancouver and understanding what our job market is like. And in fact, I made a video. I'm going to be going through, as I go through this video, talking about some of the videos that I've done. And I want you to watch those videos as well. If these are points that you're super interested in, if you want to explore the idea of jobs in Vancouver some more, I did make a video exclusively on that topic, which I'd love you to check out. And I'm going to put those links in the description as well below, not just up on the screen. So be sure to watch those after you finish this video, or take off and go check that out and then come back right here. And now we're going to talk about accommodations and where should you land when you come to Vancouver. This is something that is quite hard to figure out if you're moving here from somewhere else, because our system works very differently. I'm going to get into all about renting and buying a little bit later, but most importantly at this stage, I think I need you to understand when you arrive to Vancouver, you want to have a place where you're going to put your head, where you're not pressured to get into whether it is renting or buying something that's just not going to work for you. So the best thing that you want to do is find something for the short term, and that might be a hotel. But hotels these days in Metro Vancouver are crazy expensive. I mean, it's hard to find a hotel in Vancouver for under $500 and that's not like peak season. That is quite often off season. $500 is not unheard of around Metro Vancouver. So keep that in mind. So you want some alternatives. There's of course short-term rentals, but we've also had a bit of a crackdown on short-term rentals. So there's not as many of them around as there used to be. That used to be my go-to advice. The problem is so many of them have disappeared. And so what do you do? Well, the thing is, you might not be able to find nightly Airbnbs or VRBOs, but what you are able to find in a not too small amount is sort of longer term, short-term rentals. You might be able to rent them for a month, 30 days at a minimum, 2 or 3 months. And that's sort of a sweet spot. You can arrive and not feel pressured to get into a long-term lease or to buy something that's not going to work for you. You can take your time finding the right place. And there's other reasons. It's going to help you avoid getting scammed. It's just going to get you settled in, being able to figure everything else out without the urgency of figuring out your accommodations. And this is the one kind of accommodation that you can actually commit to or find before you get to Vancouver without fear really of getting scammed, because there are such great websites like Airbnb or VRBO. Now, there is another alternative, and those are purpose-built longer term stay hotels. They're like furnished accommodations that you can rent for anywhere from a month to 3-6 months, however long you want it, in fact. They're a little pricier. They're certainly pricier than the typical Airbnb, but there are a few of those options out there, especially if you're looking to be in downtown Vancouver. And one of them that comes to mind is a place called Staying Level. StayingLevel.com is their website. They have a couple of these around, not just in the city of Vancouver, but it's a great option. And they're not the only ones, but just know that that option exists. And I think that's a really good fit for a lot of people that are coming here. And especially if you're being relocated by a company that you might be working for, they may pay for something like this. So be sure to, if you're talking getting a new job, if you're being recruited, or if you're being transferred to Vancouver, these are all things that you might want to discuss with your employer, whether or not something like that might be covered. And what I definitely don't recommend is signing a long-term lease before you arrive or just as you arrive. And same thing, buying something. I definitely don't recommend signing a long-term lease, whether you intend on buying or renting, whatever it happens to be. It's best not to sign a long-term lease, especially before you arrive in Vancouver, because that is an area area where there is a lot of scamming and you could be taken advantage of. You want to be physically here before you sign a long-term lease. And there's many reasons that we're going to get into about that, but it's definitely something that I do not recommend. So keep in mind this short-term rental possibility with some caveats is the way that I'd go about settling in Vancouver. And the third thing you really want to figure out before you get here is your budget. And there's no doubt about Vancouver being expensive. I don't think it's going to be a surprise to you if you're watching this video and you've already started doing any kind of research. You know that Vancouver is an expensive place, but it's really, there are two things that are more expensive in Vancouver than just about anywhere else. And one of them is pretty obvious, it's housing. Number two is gas. The cost of gasoline is much higher than pretty much anywhere in North America. It's not as high as you're going to find in Europe, as an example, but definitely higher than you're going to find in Alberta or Detroit or Texas. So housing at the moment in 2025, the typical home in Vancouver, just taking into account all types of housing, whether it's a house, a condo, or a townhouse, is over $1.25 million. That's $1.25 Canadian dollars, of course. If you're coming here from the States, that's not going to be nearly as expensive anymore because of the exchange rate. But in terms of a house, you're looking at $2.5 million for a typical house at the beginning of 2025. And in terms of a condo specifically, it's $780,000. So these are all pretty substantial price points. But keep in mind, not every part of Metro Vancouver is just as expensive. And there are ways that you can make this less expensive. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But just as a starting point, keep those figures in mind. And in terms of gasoline, we have very substantial local taxes on gasoline that drive the cost of gasoline here up. Plus, there's some issues with refining capabilities in the region. So as a result, we are usually the most expensive gasoline in North America. The result of that is we are way ahead of the curve in adopting to electric vehicles. And there are more electric vehicles here than most other places because we have really expensive gasoline and then we have also really cheap electricity. And then there were, up until very recently, some pretty substantial government subsidies in buying electric vehicles. So all of these things sort of combined. But when you're moving here, keep in mind, cost of housing, cost of gasoline are going to be incredibly high compared to what you're used to most likely. There's very few places that are going to feel more expensive that way. But there's some things that you're going to find are actually less expensive. And I just gave you one of them, and that's electricity. But utilities in general in Metro Vancouver are not all that expensive. We don't pay for water directly unless, well, there's some moves to change that where we're getting metered water, but traditionally you're paying for that through your property taxes, not directly. There's no water utility. It's a service that the city provides. So that's a savings from many other parts of the world. But also electricity is incredibly inexpensive, and as well as natural gas. So we do a lot of heating through natural gas. Your furnace might be natural gas, your hot water tank might be natural gas, your stove might be natural gas. We're starting to move away from that and use more and more electricity. And again, because electricity in British Columbia is so inexpensive, we rely on hydroelectricity, and we have a lot of it in the interior of BC, producing a lot of electricity, more than we need. I mean, of course, there's always smart to use as little as we possibly can, but essentially we are the second lowest cost of electricity in North America. The only place that is cheaper is Quebec. They have more government subsidies than we do, but they also are a massive hydroelectric power province. And so province of Quebec and province of British Columbia have incredibly cheap utilities. And that's something that you want to be thinking about when you're moving here. There are some things that are going to be really expensive, some things that are going to be relatively cheap. And sort of the joking one that I often throw in is sushi is incredibly cheap in Vancouver. And you can find some fantastic sushi that is shockingly inexpensive. It's something that is so luxurious in so many other markets, but in Vancouver, it's kind of, there's sushi restaurants just like there are, I don't know, Starbucks and McDonald's, pizza places all over the place. You also find great sushi everywhere, and it's of really high quality and it's incredibly cheap. So you're going to save a little money, perhaps not enough to make it worth to subsidize the cost of housing, but it's every little bit does count. Now, I do want to mention that, of course, I've done some videos all about budgeting and all about the cost of living in Vancouver, that if you're looking for more information on this, I definitely think you're going to want to check that out. And this video up here is one that I did not too long ago about the cost of living in Vancouver, but that's sort of very general and that's for 2025. But I also did one I think that you might also really enjoy. That's my own personal cost of living that I did last year. And I kind of I lift the skirts and show you exactly what I spend, what my family spends. Keep in mind, I have 4 children. children, and this is a high cost of living city. And so we asked the question, can you survive in Vancouver on $100,000? And you're going to have to watch that video to figure out whether it's true or not, whether you can. And again, I'm going to post the link right up there, but also down below in the description. So you don't have to leave this video to check that out. Okay, so now we're going to get into very specifically the topic of housing, and I'm going to start with talking about renting. So if you're thinking of buying, you don't want to rent, then maybe skip to the next section. But I would say you may be renting for a little while, even if you're coming here to buy. And so you do want to understand what that system, how it works, because it does work differently in every single market. And I think that's something a lot of us don't realize when we move. And so I have to explain this to a lot of people when they come here. And the most important thing for you to understand is that there are no professionals that will help you find a home when you're a tenant. They do not represent tenants. What they do is they will represent the landlords. However, there's not a lot of them. In other markets, I find people are more prone to hiring property managers. In Metro Vancouver, it's not incredibly common. There's a lot of mom and pop investors. We have a lot of housing stock that is individually owned. People might own 1, 2, or 3 of them, usually just one. And it might be their house and they rent a basement suite, or it might be they own their house and then they also own a condo somewhere that they rent out. Those types of people aren't prone to be hiring property managers. And I think one of the reasons for that is that as expensive as rents might seem, people aren't making a positive return on investment. There's no cash flow for them to feel like, oh, I have some cash flow here to be able to hire a professional. So the result is a lot of owners don't do it and they handle it themselves. But the key thing to understand is you as a tenant will not have somebody representing you going out and helping you find a property. And so you're kind of blind. And I think this is a big hole in our system, unfortunately, but it is the way that it works here in Vancouver. So if you are on your own and you're trying to come here and figure out how do you rent, as I said earlier, it's a really bad idea to try and rent something from afar. You need to understand our market. You need to come here first. So definitely don't do a long-term lease before you get here. Rent sort of that short-term idea, then find a long-term lease once you're here. How do you find it? Well, you're not going to find it by going on realtor.ca, although I have to admit on the MLS, there is a small portion of listings now. They've been doing it for roughly the last 4 or 5 years or so, but it is, as I said, because not all people are hiring property managers, it's a very small percentage of the total number of listings that are out there. So it's not a bad place to be looking on the MLS, but it's not the best place to be looking. The best place to be looking is a website like Craigslist, websites like Facebook Marketplace, and Kijiji. Those 3 websites are the most common places you're going to find. And there's all sorts of other websites out there and apps and stuff, but for the most part, what they're doing is they're aggregating the information. They're pulling from the MLS, they're pulling from Craigslist, they're pulling from Facebook Marketplace, and then combining it for you in sort of a different interface. So if you find one, it might be something that you really like, and you might like that interface or the way that you're able to search. Personally, I would be focused on Craigslist and I'd be focused on Facebook Marketplace. And I do give the edge to Facebook Marketplace because it is a way that you're going to find is a less likely way that you're going to get scammed because there is an individual there. There's a bit of social context, right? You know that person, you can see how long they've been on Facebook. You can see their personal connections. You might be able to see that you're personally connected to them and that they've had successful transactions in the past. If they're brand new to Facebook and they've never rented a place before, well, maybe there's some bells that ring and it's a bit of a red flag, right? That's much harder when you just go on Craigslist and you have no idea who you're interacting with. I was just having this discussion with a realtor from Toronto who gave me a call because their son is moving here to Vancouver, and I had to explain there's nothing I can do professionally to help them. There's nobody who's in a position to help them professionally. And then he was asking, well, how do we ensure that the person who's renting this property is actually the owner of the property? And in Ontario, you'd be able to search the title search. You'd get that information and be able to verify that the names match up. Unfortunately, we don't have that access here in British Columbia. You can, that information is publicly available, but you physically have to go to the land titles office and request the information. And I don't think too many people are doing that. So definitely have your eyes wide open. You want to be looking for red flags about getting scammed. And most importantly, when you're looking at rentals, if it looks too good to be true, it is too good to be true. And if everything else you're looking at is $3,000 a month, and this one that looks incredible, fully renovated, has all the amenities, and they're asking $1,900 a month, well, that's out of whack. That doesn't make sense. You know, they're trying to pull in people for a reason. And I would just proceed with caution. I guess is the way to say it. And once again, this is an area that I've done a very specific video. So if you are looking at renting and coming to Vancouver, definitely check out this video that I did all about renting in Vancouver, where you can explore this in much greater detail. But now let's talk about buying in Vancouver. All right, and if you're thinking of buying in Vancouver, well, the world is your oyster, depending on your budget. And of course, you need a decent budget. As I said, it's $1.25 million these days for just a typical home in Vancouver, and it's $2.5 million for a typical house, $780,000 for a typical condo. So those, if you have the budget for it, there are of course options. There are cheaper places to be looking. So don't let those numbers scare you off. There are parts of Metro Vancouver, much further out into the suburbs, of course, but where you might find houses closer to $1 million. And you might find condos closer to $400,000 or $500,000. So there are options throughout Metro Vancouver. And I think that's a really key point that I try and drive home to a lot of people. If you're moving to Vancouver, don't feel like you need to live in the city of Vancouver, because the city of Vancouver is one really tiny, small part of all of Metro Vancouver. The city of Vancouver is only 115 square kilometers. Metro Vancouver is 3,000 square kilometers. It's a massive area. And city of Vancouver has just over 700,000 people. There's 3 million people in all of Metro Vancouver. So there's a lot of opportunity to find a different place and find a place that's less expensive or offers a different type of lifestyle, or a lifestyle that's similar to living in the city of Vancouver. You can find it all throughout Metro Vancouver. You just have to talk to the right person. And so if you are moving here and you're thinking of buying a place, of course, I am a real estate agent. I've helped hundreds of families just like yours move to Vancouver and find the right home. So my contact information is right there on the screen. Be sure to reach out whenever you're ready. But of course, if you're not quite ready to buy something, you can spend a bit more time doing some research. And I do have this very specific playlist all about different types of housing in Metro Vancouver and what it's like buying them. So be sure to check that out. If you're looking at coming here, you're not quite ready to talk to me about buying a place, but you want to do a bit more research, I've got you covered. And really at the end of the day, whether you're renting or buying, one of the most important questions that you're going to try and answer is like, where should I be living? And unfortunately, it's really challenging to do that from a far distance. But what you need to do is a lot of research. And thankfully, you're one of the few people who is doing that research, and that's why you're here. And you've found my channel. You found what is, I think, the best resource for people in your position thinking of moving to Vancouver and trying to find the right place. I have so many videos exploring Metro Vancouver. That's the first place that you need to start. But the realization is that Metro Vancouver offers so many different types of housing options, so many different types of lifestyles. It is a really dynamic, complicated city that offers, you can live in the urban center of the downtown. It can feel like New York City. You can also live in the bush practically. Like you can move out to distant parts of North Vancouver or to Squamish or to Mission, where you're going to be potentially in the wild, and your backyard will be the mountains and the bears and the eagles and the cougars right at your doorstep. So whatever it is that you're looking for, you can find it. And whatever kind of lifestyle you're looking for, you can find it. And it's not just the suburbs, the variation between the suburbs, it's also the neighborhoods. And even if all you're focused on is the city of Vancouver, that is also equally complicated, because every single neighborhood, whether it's Marpole or Kitsilano or Main Street or Yaletown or Cole Harbor, all of these neighborhoods offer so many variations and varieties and options that it can be really mind-blowing. And so don't just get too focused on living in the city of Vancouver, and don't get too focused on living in one specific neighborhood before you do the research. And so speaking of research, of course, I have another playlist for you, and it's all about exploring Metro Vancouver and all the great places to live. And I'm going to link it right there. I'm also going to put it down there in the description. So now we're going to talk about transportation. Is it necessary when you move to Vancouver to have a car? The short answer, well, it kind of depends. But honestly, I feel for the most part, the answer is no. If you are living in the inner city, in the city of Vancouver specifically, or anywhere along the SkyTrain, I would say you don't need a car. Would a car help? Would it be convenient? Absolutely. But if you're looking at ways to save money, if you don't want to have a car, you really don't need one. And in the city of Vancouver, our transit system is so incredibly efficient. It's relatively inexpensive, and it's clean, and it's safe, and it runs all the time. And it's really easy to get from one location to another. I don't honestly ride transit all that often, but I do not that infrequently frequently. In my past, I was on transit all the time. When I was a kid, I grew up in Vancouver. So I was, before I had a car, I was traveling around Vancouver by bus quite a bit. And I loved using transit when I was a kid and a young adult as well. And now as an adult, I use it more often when I'm going out, when I'm seeing friends, when I'm maybe going to an event, when it's inconvenient to take a car. And for the most part, in the city of Vancouver, they're trying to make it less convenient to drive and to force people in those positions to use alternatives. And it's not so bad. It's actually really nice. And I enjoy taking the SkyTrain. And now that my kids are a little bit older, we take them on transit more often, giving them that experience, whether it's taking a bus down Main Street or hopping on the SkyTrain into downtown. Just this past weekend, we had some cousins in town, we had some family, and we took all the kids over to the shipyards in North Vancouver. We went skating on the rink there. We had some donuts and basically just had a little adventure. Took the sea bus over there, and the kids absolutely love it. I mean, it's a different experience when you're doing it as a bit of pleasure, I suppose, rather than a daily commute where you have to be on it. But I really do think that it is something that people that come from other parts of North America that don't have as good transit systems, they don't realize how good it can be. And there are obviously cities in North America as well as the world that have better transit systems. Arguably, Montreal is known to have a better transit system, say New York City or London or some cities in China, some massive cities. There are areas that have better transit, but in North America, we are at the forefront of having an excellent transit system. And one of the reasons for it is that we are a relatively small area and one of the most densely populated areas in North America. And it makes providing that service much easier. The result, though, is not having a car isn't that big a deal. And especially if you're single or just a couple, you don't have kids, even if you just have one kid, it's possible to rely on transit and not have a car. And aside from transit, we also have other opportunities for alternative transportation. So car shares are great. So if you are a family that just has one kid, perhaps using car shares is a great option. If you want to get out into the mountains and you don't have a car, you can use a car share. I use car shares every once in a while to get into downtown I had a flat tire a few months ago and had to take a car share at that point. It's kind of nice to have that as an alternative. Of course, we also have Uber and Lyft, and then we also have bike shares and scooter shares. And so on top of all the other things, Vancouver is also just a walkable place. And you see a lot of people who are just choosing to walk from one location to another. I have a neighbor and I live in a relatively suburban part of the city of Vancouver, but he won't do anything with his kids unless they can walk to it. And I think that's incredibly admirable. But just by that example, it shows you that it's possible to live essentially without a car in the city of Vancouver, not just downtown, but in other parts of Vancouver and in other parts of outside of the city of Vancouver, in Metro Vancouver, in what is traditionally the suburbs. They're increasingly densely populated, and specifically around the SkyTrain stations, they're very walkable communities, whether that would be Brentwood or Metrotown or Surrey City Centre or Coquitlam Town Centre, Port Moody Town Centre. These are all very densely populated central areas where you wouldn't necessarily need a car if you didn't want one. I wanted to talk real quick about a few tools that I think are going to come in really handy if you're looking at moving here. Number one would be realtor.ca. Whether you're looking at renting or buying, I did mention there's not a ton of rentals on realtor.ca, but it is a place that you don't want to ignore. If you are looking at renting, you do also want to look at Craigslist and you want to look at Facebook Marketplace. And if you're looking at buying, realtor.ca is the place. Keep in mind, Zillow and Redfin are not the best tools. And that's something that I need to teach a lot of Americans that are looking to move here because they're so reliant on Zillow, and it's a great tool in the States. Unfortunately, in Canada, it is not. It is the one website, Redfin and Zillow are the two websites that do not offer you the full spectrum of listings. Whether you're looking at realtor.ca or just about any other real estate website, some of the more popular ones would be royallepage.ca, the company I work for, my own personal website, albrechtgroup.ca. These websites will have all of the listings available to you. housesigma.ca or .com, I can't remember. That's a particular website. It's a private company that I find a lot of people really enjoy as well. All these websites are great. It all depends on the interface that you enjoy. The way that they interact with the database that's in behind is the difference. They're focused on the same data. The only websites that are not would be Zillow and Redfin. So keep that in mind when you're looking. But another really handy tool I find that not a lot of people are thinking about or talking about are commuter apps. And there's these websites that I've discovered where you can plug in an address and it'll show you within, if you just want to be like a 30-minute commute from your workplace or from the place that, if you love the North Shore Mountains, persons and you want to be within 20 minutes of a commute, you can set that and it will show you the specific areas where you're going to be able to live. Where would be the reasonable commutes based on the amount of time, and also on this particular website for different times, which is obviously really, really important because it takes into account what's it going to be like depending on what time I need to start work. If you start at 9 a.m., that's going to be very different than 9 p.m., of course. And those will shift pretty dramatically. And you can use this whether it's for transit or driving or walking or cycling. So I think these are incredibly powerful and they can really help educate you as to what areas would make sense for you and your reasonable commute times. The best one that I have found, and there are a number out there, but the website that I would recommend is called traveltime.com. So definitely check out that. So now I just want to talk about a few different tips that are going to help you settle into Vancouver. And first of all, I want to talk about the weather. And the most important thing for you to understand is that Vancouver is a very mild climate. That is one of the things that people are really attracted to by Vancouver. And there are no real temperature extremes. And so summers, you're going to find often in the low 20s is the temperature. I mean, it can get over 30, but typically the extremes in temperature last, whether it's the midsummer or the midwinter, a week or two. And so we have these periods where we might get over 30 degrees Celsius in the city of Vancouver for about a week, maybe it's 2 weeks. Many more people are starting to think about air conditioning systems in Vancouver, but because temperatures are so mild, traditionally we don't have air conditioning. It hasn't been really all that important to most people that live here. In recent years, as air conditioning systems get less expensive and also as global warming gets a little more intense and we get a little more extremes, people have been a little more motivated to find places with air conditioning systems. I myself live in a house. I have chosen not to put in a central air conditioning system in my house. We make do with a portable air conditioner, costs maybe $400 or $500. And sure, it doesn't get the entire house down to 10 degrees when it's 35 degrees Celsius outside, but it certainly makes things much more comfortable. And this past summer, just to give you an idea, I think I only turned that air conditioning system on twice. Now, in the winter months, it's the same thing. We don't get incredibly cold, and sort of where it's going to hover at the peak winter point, which we're in incidentally right now, it is mid-February, it hovers around 0 degrees. This particular winter has been relatively mild. We didn't see a really bad cold snap, and we really didn't see a lot of rain actually. And rain is the other part of what you see much more in the winter months. And so many people talk about how wet Vancouver is, but the reality is the wetness that we get is very much confined in the winter months, sort of from mid-November to early March, late February is kind of the rainy season of Vancouver. But you should also know that while the rain is very consistent and it happens over long periods of time, we don't tend to get incredible tropical downpours. I mean, of course, it's the middle of winter, so it's not tropical. But what I mean is those massive downpours. We get long-term sort of misting. It can happen just a little bit for the day. It might happen just for half an hour in the morning. And that registers as a wet day in Vancouver, of course. But the rest of the day might be sunny or cloudy. The winter days are generally more overcast than the rest of the year as well. So you do get a little more gray, which to be honest, I think is the thing that more people have to adapt to when they move to Vancouver. Not so many people are used to being here in the winters where it's gray. I mean, if you're from the Northern Hemisphere and you're from areas like Toronto or Halifax or London or Berlin, you're going to be used to that. But if you're from sort of the central part of North America, if you're from the prairies, if you're from Edmonton, if you're from Regina, you're not going to be used to the gray that we have in the winter months. I do want to point out this particular winter also, we've just been through our coldest snap and we're just starting to get out of it. I'm looking at the weather app. It's showing me the next few days we're getting back to rain and we're getting back to warmer temperatures. But the last 2 weeks we had quite a bit of snow and it stuck around for 2 weeks, which is also highly unusual for our winters. And temperatures dipped, as low as -10, like in the middle of the night. But for the most part, kind of hovered around -5, -7 in that range. But we're going back over 0 degrees. Everything is starting to melt. And pretty soon it's just going to be back to a bit of rain. But the days are starting to get longer. You're starting to see signs of spring. In fact, there's little buds on flowers. There's a little bit of green here already. And it is mid-February. So that is something that I really love about living here is you can sort of see the end. You can see the light at the end of the tunnel, which is pretty unusual in Canada, right? There's so much of the rest of Canada that's still kind of in the middle of winter and it's still gray and dark and snowy and cold, even if it's not gray and dark. It might be bright if you're in the prairies. Oh, and I did want to mention, of course, I do have videos all about what the weather is like here in Vancouver. And if you want to get a little more in depth on that, there's also a playlist I'm going to put right there, as well as in the description, all about the weather. And what about making friends? That's one of the criticisms I hear a lot about Vancouver, is that it's a hard place to make friends. And I can't deny that Vancouver has a little more of an issue than it seems like some other places do. But honestly, I think I haven't found that experience myself. It really does depend on what part of the city you're in. I think it also really depends on where you're moving from and what age category you might be in. If you have a dog, if you have kids, if you're settled into a more residential, permanent neighborhood, that all makes it a little bit easier to connect with people. But I think you also have to make a bit of an effort. You have to break through. There's sort of a politeness barrier where people are happy to be friendly, but getting connected with people is a little more challenging. And it's a barrier that you have to make an effort to get past. And one of the best ways, one of the things that I think so many people that move here have, is a passion. And it's typically a passion for some kind of activity, usually a sport, usually some kind of physical activity. That's what's going to motivate people to be here, whether it's just walking or cycling or being a triathlete or rock climbing or snowshoeing or snowboarding, sailing, what have you. There's so many people that have these incredible passions, and that's what sort of gives them the motivation to live here and what brings them life. And so if you have something like that, joining groups, just participating with other people, for so many of us, those are the social circles that we develop and our friend groups. And if you're not making an attempt to connect in that way, it's hard to break into friend groups when other people are just busy, whether it's working or family life. But aside from those things, it's people's passions. And so you need to be able to find ways to connect with people over things that you enjoy and passions that you find. And I find in Vancouver, that's one of the easiest ways to make friends. And that's one of the strongest tips on connecting with people when you come here to Vancouver. And speaking of which, I think leading on from that, it's also this understanding that you're coming to a place where people are really open to differences. And there are people, with more than 50% of people not born in Canada being immigrants, and more than 50% of people not speaking English as a first language. This is a place, as I said, that I'm proud of, where so many people have come together from different places, and we're all getting along, mostly because we're open to differences, whether it's ethnicities or countries of origin or languages or religions or sexualities or just different ways of thinking. You, to feel comfortable living in most of Metro Vancouver, you're going to need to be open to that as well. There are places where you're going to feel at home, but the most significant part of Metro Vancouver is definitely sort of much more open, much more broad in scope and friendly and vibrant. And so ideally, those are attitudes that you're going to be open to. And if you are, you're going to feel at home in Metro Vancouver. And so if you're still thinking of moving to Vancouver and you're thinking of buying a home, as I've said before, I'm a real estate agent that has helped hundreds of families move to Metro Vancouver. I've helped them find the right home and the right neighborhood. And I can help you and your family as well. And so when you're ready to make that move and you want to start exploring those options, be sure to reach out. My contact information is right there on the screen. And of course, if you're not quite ready to do that, that is why this channel is here. It's for your education. I make these videos to make sure that you know what's going on in Vancouver, and I do the best job possible that I can to help you understand what it's going to be like to move here and to live here in Metro Vancouver. And I have dozens and dozens of videos that I've put out over the last couple of years. I keep making these videos all about moving to Vancouver and living in Vancouver every single week, and videos just like this one about exploring what it's like to move to Vancouver in 2025. And before you go, if you're curious about what it's like to live in luxury in Vancouver, I'm talking $5, $10, $20 million condos and houses. I just made this video right here that I think you're really going to love. So be sure to check that video out. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you watching this video all the way to the end. Thank you so much. I'll see you next week.